Hello everyone, welcome back to the video, and this is where the journey for this small API that we're creating is going to end. And this time we're going to be using Prisma as an ORM to connect to our Postgres database that we're going to be creating. And we will be simply creating a user without authentication. By the way, we won't be using authentication since that's going to drag the video for too long. So yeah, let's get started. So before we even get started, we want to go back and open up our terminal. So right here I'm in the terminal. And since this is not a Postgres video, and I prefer that you might be easily able to go out on the internet and search how you can set up a Postgres database and simply get up a Postgres database up and running, which is not that hard to do. I'll link up some videos down below in the description that you can check out. Alright, so for this video, I'm not going to be setting up Postgres out of the blue. I will be using Docker for that. So I'm going to do a Docker container. You can actually, if you have Docker installed, you can actually pass in the same command and get it up and running easily. So I'm going to do, oh wow, I actually have everything written up already. So let's call it, let's just say Express backend. And I'm going to run into that. So by the way, let me just tell you what goes on. So we have, let me just zoom this in a bit. So we have Docker container run, which is like the basic setup for containerizing stuff, and run actually means to run something as a Docker container. If you have already containers pre-installed or pre-created, you can use this command as well. The publish is to create a new container. 5432. 5432 is like the host port and the machine the container port that are going to be opening. Postgres generally run on 5432 port, that's why we're passing in 5432. Then the name, we're using Express backend, and detach means that it will create a separate process and run it in the background rather than running the process itself in the terminal. E stands for passing in environmental variables, and we're passing in Postgres password to be Postgres. And then finally we're selecting the image, which is Postgres. So press enter. That should do the job. If I do a docker ps, you will see that now I have my container up and running. So that said, let's go back and let's try to have a look at how Prisma works. So if I go to quick start guide of Prisma, and I can set up start from scratch, and let's just say relational database, and we're going to be using TypeScript with Postgres. So as you can see, they first say that to install Prisma, TypeScript TS node and all that, we already have this installed, and this installed, so we only have to install Prisma. So let's just go back, open up our terminal, and right here, let's just do a yarn add, and I'm going to do Prisma. By the way, make sure that this is saved dev, so you can actually prefix it right here. For npm users, you can simply do what do we call that? npm install -t, which is similar to this command, and I'm going to be prefixing it with a add latest to add the latest command for latest Prisma install. Alright, so once that is done, they actually ask us to check that, make sure that we have a tsconfig file already created, but I think we already have that, so no issue there. Then they ask for doing a npx prisma init, and simply npx prisma if you want to open up the CLI. So we will only be doing npx prisma init, by the way. So it's going to be npx prisma init. And once you do that, you will see that now you have a git ignore, which is going to be automatically ignoring the env, since we need the database URL to be in that env, and it tells about something else, for example prisma generate and do all that stuff. Don't worry about it, we'll be going through it together. So right here, if you come on the top, you will see that now we have a new folder called Prisma. Inside of it, we have the schema.prisma file, which is actually the Prisma file for this. Now, just in case if you're not getting the syntax highlighting, make sure that you go back into your extensions and install Prisma. So it's going to be Prisma, Prisma. It's going to be from Prisma team itself, and make sure that you install it. Once you have installed it, it's going to automatically color everything out for you. You will also see that you have a .n file created for you, and yeah, this is what we'll be doing. We'll be migrating to .n file, since we don't have to use this env anymore. So let's just do a port here and use 5000. Since Prisma does not accept all other files that are not .n, so we have to bear with it. So we need to do a bit of change. Just go back to your app.ts file, and inside here, let's just simply remove this. So that accepts only the .n file. We need to restart our server every time we change our environmental variables or files. So yeah, we have that up and running again. Okay, that's good. Now let's open up our bootstrapper.ts file. We need to set up the database initialization here. And fortunately for us, we don't have to do way too much out here. So if I go back to the Prisma docs, you can see actually we have another tab which is called connecting your database. Now all you have to do is to paste in your database URL. So here I have pgadmin up and running, which is for managing Postgres databases, and we have to create a few servers and all that. I already have a bit of server up for myself, but I won't be using this one. We'll be creating a one from scratch. You might not be having anything in here if you're using pgadmin. If you're using any other database manager, make sure that you do that. No issue for that as well. So let's just create a, actually I needed to create a new server. So let's just create a new server and let's call it Express backend. And we need to go back to the connection. We need to identify the host as localhost. Port should be 5432. Everything should be Postgres. Make sure the password itself is Postgres. And leave everything as it is. Click on save. There you have the Express backend. So right here we have the default Postgres database since we're going to be creating a new database. So let's go ahead and create a new database. I'm going to be creating a new database and let's just call it main database. That should do. And let's just check everything else is fine. Then make sure that you have the SQL populated as well and click on save, and that should create a main database for you. Now inside of down here you're going to see tables, schemas, and we will not be creating any table. That is going to be the work of our ORM to do that for us. So just go back and open this up and make sure that you populate these as well. So I will be populating these pretty quickly. So there we have it. The user is Postgres, the password is Postgres, and then we have the main database as our database name. You can infer them right here since we have the main database, and you remember we had user as Postgres and password as Postgres. So that creates the environmental variable file. And yeah, do not make sure that you ignore these in the git ignore because we don't want to pass them out. They are not supposed to be out on the internet. Now that we have our database connected, let's try to see what goes on. So it says that, yeah, also make sure that inside of this schema.prisma file, you actually have right connection. So by default, it's actually PostgreSQL. If you're using MySQL, you need to change it to MySQL as well. So let's go ahead and start using Prisma Migrate. Now Prisma actually tells you you have a pretty much stuff already created for you here. This is where we're going to be using it. However, we're going to be creating a really simple Prisma database. So let's just go ahead and open up our schema.prisma file, and let's just come on a new line. I'll call it model. Model stands for actually modeling stuff. For example, you're creating a model, which is actually in last is going to create a database itself, not database but a table. So consider this a table. And right here, I'm going to actually do a at map. So what will actually happen? So if I create a table out of this, it's going to name the table like capital U user, but I want to keep it lower u. So I'm going to map it. And then right here, I'm going to do an ID, which is of type integer. These are automatically coming from Prisma. This is not like JavaScript itself. And I'm going to do an ID, which is like automatically going to tell it that this is a primary key. Then we have the default, and let's do it auto increment for now. You might probably be using UUID for IDs, but right for this tutorial, let's keep it this way. We're going to be using email, and let's keep it string. And we are also going to be prefixing it, like suffixing it with unique, so that it means that this file is going to be unique. Do also remember that if I press Ctrl S, you're going to see it right at the bottom that Prettier cannot format this file. So in Prisma, generally you will see that files are formatted like these things are formatted like this. You need to do it by a bit of manual labor here, but yeah. So let's create new one. Let's say name. This is going to be of type string. And then finally, let's give it, it should be actually not like super important. So let's just keep it string. Yeah, let's just give an age as well. That's good. So there we have it. We have ID, name, email, and age. So for age, I'm going to be keeping a question mark for that. That means this field is going to be nullable. That gets rid of the Prisma stuff. All right. So let's just go back and try to commit this to our database. By that I mean we're going to be creating in migrations. The migrations are actually going to be like, so let me just show it to you. So we have this Prisma migrate tool. Like it just generally does two things, like create a new SQL migration from the file, which actually means that it just generates a SQL file and runs it against the database, so everything is generated for you. So let me just show you what I mean. If I go back to Postgres, if I refresh, you will see literally there's this table field is empty right now. So let's just do a npx Prisma migrate dev -- name and net. If you want to like thinking where this came from, it's right here. Press enter and it's going to say loaded everything up and just did, and it says that your database is now synced with it. It's automatically going to also install Prismaclient for you and generates a SQL file. Let's just go ahead and have a look at the SQL file. So inside of Prisma folder, you will see that we now have a migration folder, and inside of it we have a lock.toml file, which stands for like, I think Tom's language, something like that, but yeah, do not mess with this. Then we have the SQL file, which is actually the one that is being run against the database. So if I go back, I think that we might have installed as well. So we have Prismaclient. I'll be telling you how we'll be using it. And if I refresh these tables, let me just refresh the entire database. Oh, I think I messed the name. inside here we have main database. I think I named it something like main DB. So let me just get rid of the databases that we don't need. So this is the one that I created out of the blue, so we don't need that database. We don't need, I don't think this will be in yours, so if you just have it, just get rid of them. So now you will see that we have a user table, and if I check out this user table, you'll actually see that we have the ID, email, name, and age. So that is what we wanted to do. Now we have at least that up and running. Let's just go ahead and check out how we can actually now connect this database and use Prismaclient for that. So right here, come down, you will see install Prismaclient. Now if you remember, we actually pretty much had Prismaclient installed, I think. If I go back to my package.json file, you will see that we have Prismaclient as a dependency. That is automatically done by Prisma if you don't have it, so you don't need to worry about it. But just in case you don't have it, there's no real big issue by doing a yarn add at Prismaclient latest. Generally no issue. Always make sure you do that. So now we have the Prismaclient installed. Let's go back and see how we can use the client. So if I open this up, you will see that they actually ask for us to install the Prismaclient and then actually ask for us to invoke Prisma generate in order to accommodate the changes in your Prismaclient. One thing that we want to do is that whenever we install this, it automatically fires Prisma generate. So if I do a Prisma generate, it's automatically gonna so if I do a yarn Prisma generate, and now we can actually use the Prismaclient. So if I go back, you'll see that nothing new has happened till now, but the only thing that it tells us here is that now we can import Prismaclient from Prismaclient and then initialize it by installing a new, creating a new Prismaclient, and through that we'll be actually able to use queries. So for that sake, let's try to create another route. Let's call it post. Oops. It's not post actually, since we'll be using post. Make sure that that's imported from your decorators, because now we have decorators for this, and it's going to hit this URL. And for this part, let's just create a public async create user and do a which is going to be request, and let's call it response. Right here I'm going to return this dot user service dot create user, which is going to take in request and response. So let's go back to our user service and do a public async create user, which is going to take request and it's going to take in response, and there we have it, response. First, make sure that we save the controller file, since we have the service completely empty right now, and I'm simply going to return res.send test, just for the sake of this. Now let's try and going back and see what we can do with the client. So if I say querying the database, you'll see here, so right here they say that what you can do is import the Prismaclient from this constructor and instantiate it, define an async function named main to send queries to the database, and then call the main function. And then we have to close the database connection, which when script terminates, it's gonna do all that part for us. So let's just try doing that. Right here inside of our user service.ts file, since we're getting user by ID and doing all that stuff here, we can instantiate it right here. This is not a good practice, by the way. If you're creating a larger project, make sure that you follow good practices for that case. Let's start by creating a new Prismaclient. I'm importing it. So let's just go back and import Prismaclient from it's actually coming from .Prismaclient for some reason. It should be @Prisma and /client. Then we're going to do a const Prisma, which is equal to new Prismaclient, and let's just initialize it that way. Now this Prismaclient will actually have all our definition pre-created for us, so it knows whatever is in the database since we're using the migration tool. So let's just do it that way. Now remember, we have a user already. We don't have a user, so let's just try and create a new user. So what we can do, let's say let's just create a new user, is to say await prisma.user, which is, you can see, automatically coming in from, and I'm going to do a create. For the sake of simplicity, I will be using some default one, so I'm going to be passing in data and the name, let's say John. You will be passing it probably through variables, so make sure that you do that in your case if you want to do that. I will be keeping it simple. And the email should be john john@do.com. Remember, we have an age as well, which is completely optional. I'm going to keep it in 21. And I think that is what we have. The ID is automatically generated, no issue there. So that does the job for us, and that creates a new user. So why don't we go ahead and try this? So before we even try it, I want to do this one as well, so we can get the user. So I'm going to get all the users, by the way. So let's just do a simple one. Let's just do a yarn, or not yarn, being used to saying yarn again and again. So let's just do a return, and generally our best part will be like const all users, and this should be, oh wait, remember these are asynchronous functions, all of this. So I'm going to do a prisma.user.find many, and that's going to return us literally everything, and then we're going to return all users. Save that, and that does the job. Okay, so for this I will be using Postman for just to create that user. So let's just create a new request and make sure that this is a post request. So let's just change it to post. Can I zoom in Postman? Yeah, I can. So remember, we're hitting http://localhost. That's going to be on port 5000. And remember, the controller controls the API, so it's going to be /API/users. So remember that we just have to create a post request there. We don't need to pass in any data. However, you can actually pass in data, for example. So yeah, let's just do that, no issue. So instead of data here, let's just do request.body. So if I come back, I'm gonna go to body, do a raw, make sure that this is JSON, and here it's gonna be name. First of all, remember we have the name property. It's gonna be John Doe. Let's create the email property, which is actually required. Let's create john@doe.com. Wow. Then we have the age property, which is going to be actually a number. So let's just make it like John Doe is 21. Let's fire it. So if I go back, we actually saw that none of the requests were received. If you fire that, you will see that it keeps on running. However, we do get the data populated in here. So we have the email, name, and age created. So let's just fix it. The reason for that is that this fires, however, it's not ending. So I'm going to do a res.status of, let's say, 201, which actually stands for created. Now actually let's do 200 and do a JSON, and I want to say like I really don't know what would happen if I do this. So I'm going to do a JSON, and let's just return user like that. Save it. Let's just go back, and right here I'm gonna just create a new user. So let's call it Jane Doe, and say Jane, create new one. You see that we get the user back. Good for us. Now if I go back to the database and if I refresh this database, get the data, you will see we now have our data being populated. Best part, now we can actually fire in the get API right here. If I go back and fire the get API, get rid of the body, fire that up. Oh, I think I forgot to send the response back. So remember right here where you're just returning all users, it's better to like return it right here. So I'm going to do a res.status of 200.json. Let's send back in the it's going to be all users, just like that. You can actually put in like users, user, and make sure that this is all users. So if I go back, fire that again, you will see we get users and every of the user being populated. And that is how you can actually use Prisma to generate your database, and you can now query, use your database completely any way you want. So that was a pretty big video, but let's just go ahead on an overview of what are the things that we did. So first of all, we created a bootstrapper sort of a class that does everything for us. We had an app that is of type application. We created a constructor to take in ports, the middlewares, and the controllers. Controllers here actually stands for route, but it's a like pretty much decent name for using it. It's like a sort of convention now. And then we initialize the app, we initialize the port, and then finally we set up the middleware, the routes, the assets, and logger. In the middleware, just simply looping over all the middlewares and using them. But for routes, we need to set them up because we're using sort of a class-based approach. So that is what the entire thing was. So if you still didn't get it, make sure that you rewatch that video that we created for when we were creating these controllers. But just try using it again and again. You'll probably get a good hand of it. Then we configured assets to use these static asset that will be present inside of this public folder, which is completely empty right now. And then we created a start for like to return the application so that we can use the application functionality in the app.ts file. In the app.ts file, we did nothing but just loaded up our environmental variables, configured the port, created the application, passed in some middlewares that we might need, then finally passed in the user controller that we want, and created a server and handled SIG_turn. For the controllers, we just created a controller handler that's going to handle everything that's going to be hitting this API URL, and then this get, and we created the decorators for our handlers. That's going to be get, post, put, and delete. Then we create a restrict to middleware that can actually be inserted or injected into one particular route and restricted to any particular stuff or things like that. And that is where this actually overall thing came from. However, do remember that we also created things like a logger using a library called Winston, which is actually good. Make sure that you always use some third-party libraries for logging, since using normal console.logs is not a really good idea. We also set up our own database using Postgres and Prisma as an ORM, and that is where this video ends. So I hope you enjoyed this. This API is quite good if you want to use it. You can actually use all these decorators in your other REST APIs that you'll be creating, and I hope that you really like this video. If you're interested in more videos like these, make sure that you tell me down below in comments what you want to see more. Also, here's another video that I have created for creating Nest, Postgres, and GraphQL API. If you want to have a look at it, if you're interested into Nest and class-based approach of creating APIs, make sure that you check that out. Nest is really amazing. The best part about Nest is that it provides you all these handlers out of the box. So, and I also hope that you learned some TypeScript in there. So yeah, it was not super complicated, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.